This happened in Romania when I was around 7 or 8. My family and I would occasionally go up north to stay with my uncle on weekends. They lived in a very rural village, the kind with large pastures with grazing cows and a couple horses. There was a strange kind of peace amongst the ruminants grazing in their fields. This one night I left the house to play ball around maybe midnight. It was dark, but a dark you'd only come across somewhere really remote. I guess it was really cloudy that night because other than the light from a street light, it was like outer space. Something I should mention is that where I was playing was a good 10 meters from one of the areas the cows stayed with a fence in between us. The kind that you'd expect to see in an impoverished country, built by hand and seeming as if it were one gust of wind from falling apart. I could make out the silhouettes of the cows through the fence boards with the help of the streetlight. I noticed they were sleeping, but one cow in particular kept waking up. I was about to continue playing when it lifted its head just enough that I locked eyes with it through the fence boards. The streetlight allowed me to see its eyes clearly. I got an extremely eerie vibe as it looked at me. I mean, if you've been around farm animals, you know they can behave in odd ways sometimes. But this was different. I felt like it was looking in a way that was far too intelligent for a cow. I was pretty creeped out at this point, but I was not a country boy, so I assumed it was some behavior that I had not yet grown accustomed to. I tried to keep playing, but I couldn't keep from looking back towards the cows. Suddenly, I heard one of the cows get up. As I looked back, it started walking behind a little tree. I'm almost certain it was the cow that I had made eye contact with. It let out a series of a few moos like a cow would usually do. The issue was that the more it mooed, there was a desperation in its voice. It sounded as if someone was slowly strangling a cow with a piece of wire or rope. At this point, I had decided to go back inside. I looked back from the porch steps, and its head had become distorted like it was dripping with water. Next thing I saw truly etched a nightmare I will never forget into my head. This at least 1-ton cow started to raise itself and stand on 2 legs. It looked beyond unnatural. I started screaming at my dad, but I was so shocked I couldn't form words. I was scared the cow monster was waiting on the porch. My dad always knew how to calm me down, and I naturally felt calm when I was around him. Once he was able to calm me down and convinced me to go back out and check with him. We went back to the road to find all the cows in their usual places sleeping, and the one I assumed to have stood on its hind legs was just grazing grass. My dad said I was fine and that I must have seen stuff, but I swear. As we walked back into the house, I took one final look towards the cows, and the one who was grazing grass looked at me. I eventually forgot this whole incident. I was a kid, and I guess to protect us, our minds try and wipe truly traumatic events from our heads. I only vaguely remembered this incident until one day my dad had brought it up while we were chatting. He said he'd never seen me that scared before as a kid. He didn't tell me at the time, but he thought that I had seen a demon. It was only then I was sure again that this incident had actually happened. Now I am older, but I still can't wrap my head around this incident. I still do visit my family up north, with slight fear, of course. Nothing of this sort has ever happened again to me. Around 5 months ago, a group of friends and I decided to spend the weekend at one of our mutual friends' house, which happened to be located way up on a remote mountain. We had been itching for any sort of adventure for quite a while. So when this mutual friend told us about this place, we pretty quickly jumped on the opportunity. We had 2 cars. Split between the 6 of us, we could make it there comfortably with 3 people in each car. Our mutual friend's house was located in a very small village up in the mountains. To give some backstory on this quote-unquote village, the only other resident was an old farmer and his cows. The rest of the population had moved out long ago due to the village's remote location, difficulty in getting supplies, and lack of medical access. Most of the road was especially hard to navigate during winter. We hit the road at around 8 p.m. The drive was to be about 3 hours through the countryside, then into the mountains. We had reached a part of the road that was noticeably worse than before. The only thing we could see in front of us was the forest, illuminated by the car lights. Some time passed as we crawled down this road when our headlights shown on our friend's car stopped on the side of the road. We pulled up behind them and went to see what the problem was. I was honestly more curious at this point than scared. Sure, the dark forest was creepy, but the fact that we were 6 athletic men put me at ease more than I probably should have been at the time. Apparently, a large branch had been thrown and hit their car from the driver's side. The impact was enough to scratch some of the paint and slightly dent the door. The group from my car, including me, gave them a hard time and didn't take them very seriously. We told them it was probably a branch from a tree that fell on the car with the wind, but they were pretty adamant it had been thrown. I honestly kind of felt like they were trying to mess with us, but at the same time, they had been ahead of us at least 20 minutes, and we were all pretty tired. I doubt they were so committed to a prank to the point that they would stop and wait for us to catch up to them. Needless to say, we were all kind of getting spooked. We pointed our high beams towards the woods around us and scanned about for a while, but obviously there was nothing anymore. We began driving again, but this time there was no fooling around of any kind on the road. The other car that had previously been ahead of us now instead followed closely from behind. We finally reached our friend's house at maybe 11:30 p.m. We made something to eat, showered, and were ready to go to sleep pretty quick. We decided to go for one last smoke before bed. My friend's house was in a pretty good location perched against a slope. You could see most of the forest and the village, even at night, especially this old church. There wasn't anything special about the church, just your standard stone and wood building, but it definitely added an ominousness to the night. As we were smoking, one of my friends pointed out something coming down the road. It appeared to be a dog or a wolf, but we couldn't tell because it was dark and too far away. As it got closer, we could see it better. It had black fur and appeared to be missing one ear. It just stood there on all fours, staring at us from maybe 150 meters away. What freaked me out was that it never sat down. At some point, we weren't even sure we saw the dog in the first place. It was standing so still. But there seemed to be something draped on its back that blew a little every time the wind came, which made the silhouette much more obvious. We were getting royally freaked out at this point and decided to just go back indoors and lock the doors. We went to bed at maybe 1:30, but I couldn't fall asleep because of how creepy the incident on the drive was, as well as the strange dog. I somehow fell asleep and woke up to the sound of coughing at maybe 3:30 a.m. or 4 a.m. It woke me up because it sounded like coughing coming from outside. That got me on high alert pretty quickly, because no person has any good business out this far in the mountains, especially after the strange things we'd experienced the night prior. I couldn't tell how far away the sound came from, but it sounded close enough that I felt concerned. I got up gently to investigate from the peephole of the front door. I didn't dare raising the blinds, because there was enough light coming in from outside that whoever was out there would immediately notice. Whatever I tried, I just couldn't make out what was outside from the peephole. As I adjusted the distance between my head and the door to try and get a clear image, I heard literally right from the other side of the wooden door, a cough. I froze. It sounded as if it was literally right on the other side of where my head was. None of my friends had woken up to the other sounds, but the yelp I did and the stumble backwards into the shoe cabinet definitely did. As they came to their senses and asked what was going on, something began to bang loudly on the front door. Everybody froze. It stopped after maybe 10 seconds, but it was very loud and forceful enough that the door shook on its hinges. We must have waited for what felt like half an hour. We discreetly checked the windows, but we didn't see anything. It's safe to say nobody went to sleep that night. Everybody slept with a weapon. The next morning, we packed all our stuff and began driving back. Our mutual friend insisted nothing like that had happened before, and that perhaps it was the one other resident of the village. But even he was scared, and he was definitely not staying in that house alone. Even if it was the other resident, why on earth would they do something like that to scare us at night? It also doesn't explain the other strange stuff that happened during the drive. Not exactly the adventure I was hoping for, but was an experience nonetheless. We're all just glad we were able to leave when we did. One of my close friends lived next to a house that was always vacant. It would sell, people would move in, and then one day they'd be gone and the house would be up for sale again. One summer, when the house was listed again and the last family had moved out, we decided to go take a tour and eat some Jack in the Box we had picked up. We weren't very smart sometimes and thought it would be cool to play chicken with whatever was haunting this house. My friend was really skinny and crawled through the dog door that led straight into the kitchen, then opened the back door for me. We went through all of the rooms and it was pretty nondescript, just a typical 50s-style bungalow house with a similar layout to his home, lots of pretty woodwork and built-ins. The house had always fascinated us, not just because of its frequent turnover, but because of the stories that surrounded it. Neighbors whispered about strange noises, flickering lights, and even shadows moving behind the curtains when the house was supposed to be empty. It was the kind of place that kids dared each other to run up to on Halloween, tapping on the windows before sprinting away in mock terror. Despite the creepy tales, we felt a rush of excitement mixed with fear as we explored, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls. After we determined that the house really wasn't that creepy after all, we sat down in the dining area on the floor across from a little horseshoe-shaped nook with a kitchen table and built-in bench. It was dusk out, but the windows didn't have curtains, and it was supposed to be a full moon that night anyway. I suppose that it would just add to the spooky vibe. At this point, we had been in the house for maybe 25 minutes, and after we finished eating, we stayed sitting just to hang out and talk since we weren't spooked out at all. All of a sudden, mid-sentence, completely out of nowhere, my vision went black, and I felt this eerie coldness wash all over me. I'm getting chills thinking about it. A feeling so thick I felt like it penetrated through my body down to my bones. At the very same moment this happened, my friend screamed. I virtually could not see anything and was groping around trying to find something to grab onto, and I felt so unsettled and cold. There's really no other word for it. After what felt like hours, I felt my friend's hands in mine, and he pulled me to my feet and dragged me through the house to the back door. He kept pulling on my arm, and I still couldn't see anything. We got outside, and slowly, you know that feeling when you get a whole body shiver and it runs down your spine? As soon as I was outside, that's what I felt, except this was a whole body shiver that started at the tip of my toes and went all the way up to my scalp, and unexpectedly and suddenly I could see again. My friend was as pale as a sheet and looked absolutely terrified. I felt off and sort of gross, I guess is the best word, and in shock. I told him that I couldn't see at all until I was outside, that it felt like I had been enveloped in blackness. He was just staring at me, and I finally asked him why he had screamed. He hugged me and told me that he pulled me out of the house as soon as I started reaching around like I was blind, because a little girl who was completely black and yet see-through crawled out from under the table we were across from and sat on top of me.